All right, we will go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today. We've got a really great webinar planned for you guys, so we're really happy that you have joined us. Before we get started, I just want to remind everyone the purpose behind this webinar. Our intentions are to provide an opportunity for all of you to hear from industry-specific professionals about how they have been and are moving forward with logistically implementing the guidelines set forth by the governor and then other industry leaders. We have asked our presenters to be as thorough as possible in their explanations and their questions, but this webinar is absolutely not intended to replace anyone's responsibility in reading through and really understanding the guidelines and the safety measures that have been recommended for construction work sites. So with that out of the way, I will go ahead and hand it over to Jermaine Freeman, Deputy Chief of Staff to Mayor Andy Burke, and he is going to kick us off.
All right, thank you, Brooke. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the City of Chattanooga for our webinar today. We know that there are some businesses that have been given permission from our local county government to begin reopening, and we know that construction work was deemed essential at sort of the beginning of this pandemic and during this process. And so a lot of our construction work sites have been sort of operating and continuing to operate throughout the pandemic. But as Brooke mentioned, we do these webinars to help different industries understand that there are some recommendations and guidelines and resources that are available to help you operate safely and to help you keep your employees safe and your customers safe when that applies. So we wanted to make sure that we provided some resources like today's webinar to help construction industry workers and construction industry owners to effectively continue to reduce the spread of COVID-19 and keep those workplaces safe. So today we invited a great panel, as Brooke mentioned. And so today we have Leslie Gower, Executive Director of the Association of General Contractors for East Tennessee. Leslie, do you want to take a chance to introduce yourself for a minute? I think you're on mute.
Oops. Hi, thanks so much for allowing us to bring this panel together today. This has been such a hot topic for us as safety, and from day one when we got the green light as an essential business to get back on the job sites, the main priority was the safety of the people working on those job sites. So, you know, Kevin Cannon, who you'll meet in a minute with AGC of America, their team from Washington was really filtering down some incredible resources that we were passing along to our industry. And they're going to be sharing some of those today. I just thank you so much to the City of Chattanooga for giving this platform and for helping us spread the word outside of AGC to those construction companies that could benefit from some of these resources as well.
All right, very good. Thank you, Leslie. And as Leslie mentioned, we're also joined by her colleague, Kevin Cannon, Senior Director of Safety and Health Services for the Association of General Contractors of America, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Kevin, do you want to take a chance to introduce yourself?
Yeah, first I want to say thank you for the invitation to participate. You know, as Leslie mentioned, you know, early on, being, you know, the national office, we felt like our responsibility was to help our chapters and in turn help their members. So we've, you know, worked with within our safety committees and, you know, consulted with CDC guidelines and recommendations and put together what we think are some helpful tools and resources for agency members and non-members. You know, we weren't, you know, keeping this close to the vest. We felt like if anyone could benefit from it, they could have access to it. So, you know, just here to talk about what, you know, the good thing or maybe the bad thing is that, you know, we deal with contractors all across the country. So we get to hear, you know, what they're dealing with and, you know, with their respective state governments, local governments, and so on. So it'd be good to hear what's going on in the city of Chattanooga. So thank you guys for the invitation.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Kevin. We are also joined today by Brian Charlesworth, Superintendent of Wright Brothers Construction. Brian, do you want to take a moment to introduce yourself?
Hey, again, my name is Brian. I'm with Wright Brothers. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and share with you guys a few things we're doing during the pandemic here. So maybe I can highlight a few things that can help you guys, what we've been doing with our crews. And of course, most of our work that's been going on has not stopped during this, so we've had to deal with it and switch gears, and so it's been interesting. So thank you.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Mr. Charlesworth. We are also joined by Mr. Russ Bartholomew, President of Core Safety in Chattanooga and AGC East Tennessee Safety Committee. Mr. Bartholomew, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you again for the invitation today. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about COVID-19 and what we're doing to help local companies here. Continuing, as Brian had mentioned, a lot of the construction companies have continuing through this pandemic, but some are starting up. So look forward to hearing the discussion and adding to it.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Russ. And then we also have, last but not least, we've got Mr. Dallas Rucker and I believe Mr. Charlie Young. Dallas is our director of the City of Chattanooga's Land Development Office, and Charlie Young is the assistant director. So Dallas, you want to introduce yourself? And I don't know if Charlie's going to stick his head in the camera, but yeah, there he is.
Sure. Yes, I'm Director of Land Development Office. We also have Tony Kinder, which takes care of the some of the site management side of things. And yes, we're happy to talk about some new software we rolled out that will aid in social distancing. And I appreciate all the hard work the contractors do to develop our community and the country as a whole, and all that they're doing to stop aid in stopping the spread of the COVID. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, Dallas. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Tony. So thank you all again for being on our panel today. And so we thought we would have just a great dialogue since we've got all of you joining as panelists. So let's jump right into our material. After we talk, we'll make sure to reserve time to respond to any questions from our viewers. So if you are a viewer and you do have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat, in the Zoom chat, and Brooke and I will make sure that we follow up and try to respond to as many questions as possible after the panel discussion.
Sorry, Jermaine, can I add one thing?
No,
This webinar is being recorded and it will be available online. Everyone on the webinar will receive a follow-up email, and we'll make sure that you guys have access to this webinar, and then any other resources that we have available, we will put all of that online. So just an FYI, this will be available.
Yeah, thank you, Brooke. Okay, so let's jump right in. Russ, if you could sort of start us off by giving us kind of an overview of some highlights that are in Governor Lee's Tennessee Pledge guidelines for the construction industry.
Sure. So the Tennessee Pledge is issued by Governor Lee, and the pledge is to protect safety and livelihoods of Tennesseans by operating businesses in accordance to the guidelines and best practices established by the CDC, state and local government officials in partnership with industry leaders. Specifically, the Tennessee Pledge asks businesses to provide working conditions that protect both employees and consumers while securing livelihoods. This plan also asks for employees to commit to protect themselves, their coworkers, and the customers they serve. And finally, it encourages every person to act responsibly by following recommended guidelines for social distancing, hygiene, and wearing protective equipment when appropriate. Specifically for construction, the pledge outlines 12 bullet points. And I won't go into detail, but I'll tell you what those bullet points are. The first one is screen employees with some basic questions before coming to work. Screen employees through temperature screening, either self-directed or at the project itself. Develop a COVID-19 response plan, which I think is really important for most construction companies. Communicate and train employees and subcontractors on current CDC recommendations and worksite procedures. Ensure employees are aware of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which allows for paid sick leave or expanded family and medical leave. Manage sick employees. Have a plan for sending employees home that become sick or have reported sick at work, and manage their return to work. Properly disinfect tools, supplies, and equipment. Use face coverings when social distancing is not possible. Utilize other PPE such as eye protection, gloves, and other face coverings. Promote good hygiene. Promote social distancing. And then look at things like documentation, if that can be done electronically, such as weight tickets and et cetera. So those are the 12 bullet points. And like I said, we can get into further detail in our discussion. I'm sure those are going to be available to you after the webinar to read in more detail.
All right, thank you so much, Russ, for giving us that overview. And so at this point, I'm just going to throw out a few questions for all of our panel. And so just sort of feel free to jump in and to respond to questions that you can. And so my first question for the panel is, how have the new Tennessee Pledge guidelines impacted construction job sites? And so Brian, you're probably going to be in the best position to answer that. But that's for each of you to respond to.
Okay, I think Russ may hit just about everything I had here that we are implementing on the jobs. So, as far as like the meetings, we always we've actually turned to meetings just like this here, the Zoom meetings and whatnot, and then where we can or we have to have people actually in the meeting, we keep it down to 10. So as far as like managing sick people and whatnot, if somebody feels bad or whatever, we do take temperatures throughout the day in the morning, to make sure that they don't have anything coming in from the day before. And we have instances where somebody did feel bad, so we actually sent the help room home, and they get tested, and they go through that procedure before they can come back. Which luckily we haven't had anybody with the COVID yet that I know of. We are taking it very seriously as far as sanitizing everything. So we have bottles of sanitizer in all of our equipment. So once you get on the piece of equipment, you sanitize it down before you get on it, and after you get through the piece of equipment. And the tickets, it was a little challenging at first to do the e-tickets. So specifically, like for instance, if inspector has to have an actual copy of a batch, like right then when the truck shows up. It's hard to get if some places don't have email. So what we've kind of resulted to on some of the jobs is the truck driver will hang on to the ticket, but hanging out the window, and the inspector will actually take a picture of it, safe distance. But where we can do the e-ticketing, we do we scan those in so to minimize people handling the tickets. And of course, training for our people for the new policies. It's a pretty big deal, and make sure everybody takes it seriously. Our culture I think results in that. And we started out with the masks as far as where folks aren't able to stay 6 feet away. There's some places where you have to get in there and work together. So in those cases, we do have masks, and we actually provided these buffs now that the guys wear. But it's just something we have to deal with now. Just going forward, I think everybody's aware of the norm when moving forward. So
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Kevin, you want to jump in there?
No, I would say, one of the things, and, all the things Brian mentioned, as far as implementation of the CDC guidelines, I think that's pretty much universal across the board. Most contractors have done that already, especially those that have been allowed to continue to work. And then, those who are in a position where they're just starting to resume work, I know they've built those into their programs. I think one of the biggest things, if outside of the guidelines, is really it's required folks to to examine or focus more on how they schedule their trade partners, with the intent or goal of, enhancing social distancing, making sure that you are able to complete the project, but with fewer people. That means, staggering your trades and, even staggering some of your own shift to make sure that the number of folks or the number of folks are limited on the job site, so you can, in a more easy fashion, promote social distancing. I know, as I mentioned early on, one of the things that, I get to do is talk to contractors all across the country. And, some jurisdictions have gone to X number of employees per square foot. So, it is really, kind of focusing your attention on how you're going to accomplish the work, but with fewer people. All the other things that Brian mentioned are, I'd say, you do see more sanitizing of equipment, tools, high touch services. I mean, before, when you think about housekeeping on a construction job site, it was just brooming down at the end of the day. Now, you're disinfecting and wiping. So I think those are some of the things that folks are becoming accustomed to.
Yeah, that's great. Russ, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so something just to add to that, Brian mentioned, working on projects with fewer people. We have seen contractors be successful going back to the owner and getting an extension to the schedule for that reason. Because of the delay and less people on the project. So a lot of contractors have been successful doing that. So it's something to think about for contractors that are going to have to work with staggered shifts, et cetera.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And so let me ask sort of a follow-up question to that. And this is for any of you. How have these guidelines, obviously the guidelines have changed the job site itself, but then how have the guidelines also impacted the way that that the GC is going to work with subcontractors? And can you guys talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can add in a little bit on that. As Brian and Kevin both mentioned, it's going to create a lot more attention to scheduling to make sure that we're not, putting trades on top of trades and staggering those shifts. The good thing is we're going into summer, so we have more daylight, so we can actually stagger those shifts and still get quite a bit done with longer workers. But it's definitely going to take a little bit more effort from the GC to make sure that coordination is happening.
Right. And and again, just speaking with some of the excuse me, agency that I deal with routinely, I think one of the things is, getting your smaller contractors to understand the importance of adhering to the guidelines. I don't want to say that they're not believers, but they just, I guess it's not really understanding, why they're being asked to implement these measures when, especially with your smaller guys and gals that are out there. I think it's getting them to understand that the guidelines that are being, put in place, the policies that are being enforced are, not only for their protection, but protection of the, entire project as well as the general public. So I think it's more of an education piece for some of our smaller smaller subcontractors.
Yeah. Brian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I agree with that. Main thing is just explain to the your subcontractor before they come on the site that we have to train our people and make sure everybody understands how important it is to follow the guidelines. Keep everybody safe. Your family safe and people around you. So, I agree.
Very good. And this is for anyone. Are there any best practices that you all have seen locally or nationally in terms of keeping people safe and implementing guidelines?
One thing, and I know some are doing this because the state or local government is requiring it. But I've heard of some of our, contract members, again, identifying a point person, a social distancing monitor, or COVID-19 program coordinator or whatever the case may be, just someone who's dedicated to the implementation and enforcement of the, excuse me, on the program. Now it's inconsistent, across the board, but I know there are some localities that have required such a position or individual, and I think that's one thing that contractors have put in place to help them manage. The safety guy or gal already has their hands full. And this is something new to everybody. This isn't your typical construction hazard. So, having someone that will, that's their sole responsibility, sort of like the roof monitor, where that's their only job. And so I think that's what I've heard that's, kind of outside of the normal guidelines that we see from CDC and so on. But, it's not, something that's consistent across the board, but that is something that I've heard contractors doing is, identifying an individual who's, their sole responsibility is the implementation of their coronavirus, COVID-19, plan.
Jermaine, I'll add to that. We have gotten quite a few requests through our services to provide a medic on site to take temperatures at the beginning of the day and then throughout the day. If somebody gets sick, there's an advantage to having a medic do it versus one of your own employees from a work comp liability standpoint and just proper training and bloodborne pathogen. So it's something we would encourage. You wouldn't probably want your superintendent out taking temperature checks at the start of every day. The other thing is the medic would go around throughout the day and they do basically social distancing checks. Speaking of what Cannon was doing, kind of like an audit, making sure that employees are not gathering at lunch or break times and, violating that 6-foot distancing.
Not to do an advertising plug for one of my members, but I will mention that Inline Electric has one of those new towers that can measure body temperatures for a mass crowd when you're going onto a job site. I think we're probably going to see more and more of that kind of technology coming onto sites going forward. Kevin, have you seen anything like that across the country?
Yeah, we've had, actually, we were on our steering committee call last week and the temperature checks came up and, some raised the point that Russ made is, having medics do it. And then, some, even, I'll say they understood the reasoning behind it, but they weren't, overly confident that it was achieving much. The one point that was made about the temperature checks is, we've checked thousands of people and we've yet to turn anyone away from it. However, we've had a positive case or two on our site. So, the temperature check's not foolproof. But to your point, Leslie, we did have someone from Clark, I believe it was, who said they are using, thermal scanning booths and technology on their job sites as well.
I think as time progresses, I think you'll start seeing more companies that move into beyond temperature checks and actually do the antibody testing. Once that occurs, I think when the testing becomes more available at this point, the problem is the availability. But once that testing starts to become more available, I think you'll see companies switch from the temperature checks to the antibody testing.
And Russ, on that point, are there some COVID-19 safety protocols that you think are going to stay in place moving forward, maybe kind of indefinitely? And Kevin, feel free to jump in on that point as well.
Yeah, I think the hygiene piece is going to be very important moving forward, regardless whether COVID-19 goes away or not. I think you're going to see more frequent cleaning of projects, more frequent cleaning of tools, porta-johns. You might even see the common water cooler go away over a period of time. So some of those things that we got to come accustomed to and used to in construction, you might see disappearing because of this. And I think you'll also see a lot more use of technology, such as Microsoft Teams and Zoom. I think most industries are seeing that, not just construction, but sometimes we're reluctant to use technology, and this has kind of forced us into it. And now that we're doing it, we're seeing the efficiency in it. So.
Yeah, and to Russ's point, I think the sanitizing of the job sites. I think that's going to be in place. As far as some of the other elements. I would say it depends on who what contractor you're talking to. Right now when I'm talking to some of our contractor members, some of them are, itching to get back to the way things were, business as usual, whereas we have some who are, really looking long term and, seeing how some of these new policies that they've implemented can be, sustained over the long term. I think it would, be dependent upon, what they see. I mean, I'm a safety professional, so I'm not, putting production over safety, but I think that, examining, your operations, your productivity level, I would think also plays a part in what will stick around and what won't. If you're able to produce at the same levels, then why not? That would be the question that I would ask myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And so on that point, Brian, can you talk a little bit about how Wright Brothers is dealing with getting enough supply of things like hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, disinfectant, masks, gloves? Are you all having any issues getting a hold of PPE?
So I think like Russ or Kevin, one of you guys mentioned it, but pointing out a specific person to head this thing up. We do have that person, and he is taking the ball on getting basically everything that we need. Sanitizer was a little hard to get a hold of. We had to do some alternatives, some mixture of some alcohol, some other stuff that the other companies provided, not just specifically just the hand sanitizer. And then the masks were a little tough to get a hold of, but they're starting to come back. But as of right now, I mean, we're in pretty good shape, as far as supplies are concerned. So you just have to reach out to your local facilities, your suppliers. I think most of them have caught back up now because there was a rush on it at first. But I think right now everybody's stocked back up on those things. So it's not been a problem for us.
Good. Russ, have you heard any complaints from any of your partners about access to PPE?
Well, I think this was an issue a month ago. The conversation has changed a lot now. As Brian had mentioned, I think a lot of the suppliers now are stocking back up and have stocked up pretty good. The recommendation is try to maintain 30 days of supplies in house if you can. That's what we would recommend. And that may mean you may need to go to more than one supplier. A lot of companies have that one supplier they want to use and have a relationship with. And this may mean reaching out beyond just that one supplier to make sure you've got other relationships so that if you need to lean on them, you can.
Very good. And so can you all talk a little bit about how specifically you're keeping employees safe, potentially from spread from each other? What are you guys kind of doing or recommending in terms of what to do if an employee comes up with either a high temperature or actually test positive for COVID-19? What are you guys kind of recommending for your other workers?
What we've recommended to our members in our sample plan is basically following the CDC guidelines as far as, even treat even a suspected case as a confirmed case until you get confirmation that it's not a confirmed case. But just following the CDC guidelines to a T. I think one of the biggest things that, and we've been having some conversations with the folks at CDC is an employer's guide for contact tracing. I think that's one of the things that I hear from folks is that, this can become a nightmare, even when you use technology. I know there's one of the individuals I spoke with is using that one of those new devices. I don't want to call the company's name out because it's not a commercial for them, but one of the new devices that are supposed to, help with the social distancing, provides an alert when you become, within 6 feet of another individual. But in the event that someone on the job site, does end up testing positive, I think the contact tracing piece of it is, again, it can be quite the challenge. I'll put it that way. And so I'm hopeful that CDC will issue the guidelines. I think they said there's something in the clearance that will help employers understand their role in that process.
Good deal. Anybody else want to jump in on that one, or?
Well, I know something on, that Wright Brothers is doing. We try to limit our crews to smaller groups, and the groups to stay away from one another, just in case an instance like what Kevin was saying. We do all the formalities of taking temperatures. Say someone does come up sick. So our hope is to limit the exposure just to the smaller group instead of like the whole job site, if that makes sense. So in addition to all the CBC requirements, we're doing that also, just in case.
Very good. So let me ask this question: how has the implementation of the new safety guidelines, how has that kind of gone over with the workers themselves? Are workers being responsive to the guidelines, and how are you finding that those conversations are going in terms of worker response, as you recommend for workers to sanitize after they use a piece of equipment, or to wear face masks, or to not gather around the water cooler? How are those conversations kind of going?
Go ahead, Brian.
Okay. At first, a lot of folks didn't like wearing the mask and whatnot because it's hot. You're out there in the sun, you're sweating, you got this thing on. But the guys realize that it is important, and it also helps that leadership shows an example out there. To show the guys that everybody does care, and we have to do these things now. And then leading by example, I think it's a big deal to make sure everybody abides by it. But I mean, I think at this point it's just the norm. But I know that the people coming back into the industry now, they're going to have to get geared up and ready for it there.
All right, Russ, you want to add anything?
I think Brian hit the exact point that I was going to mention. That is, leadership commitment to it, and leadership, leading by example, making sure that when your leadership's around the project, they're following the same guidelines, and the workers will tend to follow. We have not gotten quite the pushback that I thought we would. I think most workers understand the seriousness of it, not for just themselves, but for their family members, knowing, hey, they may be they may be asymptomatic. And be carrying it around themselves. So I think most workers have understood what we're asking from them, and have abided by it without too much pushback.
Very, very good. Kevin, I wasn't sure if you wanted to add anything there.
No, I think both Russ and Brian kind of hit it. The biggest thing I've heard is the wearing of the mask. And, as we start to head into the summer months, that's going to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges is, trying to keep folks comfortable. But then again, who knows what requirements will be in place by the time, the heat of the summer comes up. As we start to move through the various phases, there could be different requirements. Now, if a contractor chooses to relax those, I think that's their prerogative, but we could see some change in the guidelines as we move forward a few months, even weeks.
Yeah. Let me ask you all this: as some of the other businesses begin to reopen, we're now obviously seeing restaurants that are open, so workers can now go to restaurants during lunch breaks, for example. Are you all recommending that workers potentially wear face masks during lunch breaks or break periods or periods away from the job site? Are you recommending that they wear face masks or do any sort of social distancing when they're on their lunch breaks, even if that means them going someplace else away from the job site? Brian, we'll start with you and then see who else wants to jump in.
Well, to be honest with you, most of my guys eat lunch on the job.
Okay.
But those do, I think, talking to everybody, we've had pretty limited group that's really actually going out and eating lunch just yet, because a lot of them don't want to deal with it, just around crowds still. But I mean, if we do, just obviously wash your hands, keep your distance, as much as you can. So, but I mean, right now we're limiting not as a company, but I think as a, you know, just as a person, individuals, but you know, they're not a lot of them are going out just yet, so to eat lunch. So
Yeah. Anybody else want to, Russ, did you want to add anything?
Sure. You know, I think it's important that our workers and just as citizens, we follow the practices of the business that we're walking into. So we need to be aware of what that business practices are before we go in, whether it's wearing a mask or maintaining social distancing. So, you know, when I walk into a business, I'm looking at the signs at the front door to find out what the requirements are of that business or practice. And I think others should do the same. That will avoid any type of confrontation or any issues. And I think that's the best way to approach it, and ask your employees to do the same.
Right.
All right, good deal. So just a couple of final questions before we sort of move over to Dallas. How are you all sort of working with workers that may have pre-existing medical conditions that may put them at greater risk of becoming seriously ill if they do contract COVID? Are you all having specific conversations with those types of workers or making any sort of accommodations for those workers?
I could probably speak to that. I know we've had a few employees with you know, some pre-existing conditions, what you're talking about. At first, when you know this thing started spreading around, we actually sent a few of the guys home, but we took care of them though. But obviously, when they come back, you know, if they're a superintendent or foreman, we have them stick to their truck, limiting their exposure to folks as much as we could or can. And of course, you know, telling the other workers around them that are working near these folks to obviously stay away from, you know, social distance, make that more of a, you know, precedence there. So I think it's,
You know, on the flip side of that, what Brian mentioned, you know, he sent workers home and took care of them. I think that's important. But you may want to make sure you don't discriminate either against any particular class of individual or anybody who's got a disability in doing so. So just keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, good job. And then my last question is, obviously right now in Hamilton County, the health department is currently reporting about 717 positive cases of people with COVID-19, of which 62% are people who identify as Latino. There is a lot of interest and concern about the fact that there are a number of Latino Americans and Latino individuals that work in the construction industry. Are there assurances or things that you would like for our Latinx community to know in terms of guidelines or practices that you all are implementing to keep them safe? Just because I do realize that there is a lot of concern in the community, and a lot of research seems to show that people typically contract the COVID-19 either in a workplace environment because they're in a cluster, or they get it at home because they get it from a family member. Is there anything that, or any assurances that you would like for folks that are in these communities to be aware of?
I mean, I can speak to that. You know, we treat every employee the same, whether they're, you know, regardless of nationality. I think the biggest thing is that making sure that we break that language barrier, whether that be through signage or with additional training, you know, in the native language, so they understand what the policies and procedures are, and so that they can come to work and feel safe.
Very good, very good. Kevin, did you want to add anything, or Brian, before we go?
No, I think Russ made a good point, is, you know, just making sure that the information that you're disseminating is in a language that they can understand. You know, when it comes to safety, you know, safety professionals, or the, you know, just safety in general within the industry, knows no, you know, race, you know, nationality, religion, or anything of that matter. You know, all the policies are, you know, equally implemented. I think it's just how you, I just think it's how you are able to get that information to them in a way that they can understand. I think that's the biggest challenge right there.
Yeah. All right, good deal. Brian, did you want to add anything before we go to Dallas?
I think they covered it.
All right, very good. So thank you all for all of that great feedback and for those contributions during our panel discussion. Before we jump into the participant Q&A, and I know I've seen some questions come up in the chat, I want to give a chance for Dallas Rucker, the director of the City of Chattanooga's Land Development Office, a couple of minutes to talk about the permitting process updates. Dallas, do you want to take it away and give us a couple of updates?
Sure, Jermaine. Let me say one thing real quick before we get too far. You know, we've got guys on sites all over town, and we've seen a lot of these things being implemented, and that's a good thing. And if my inspectors seem a little standoffish, you know, we don't want to be the conduit that transfers it to 10 other jobs. So please understand that. And my inspectors, if they need to be scanned or whatever, you know, when you come on a job, by all means, they will do that. And when we've seen a couple of jobs get overcrowded, we put information out to the AGC and the home builders as well. And, you know, and they seem to be very quick to get the information out that, you know, social distancing was still a requirement. So, but for that and the community of contractors, let me say, you know, thanks for all that. And with my limited staff, you know, we sure don't need Corona here either. So we'll have 2 or 3 guys trying to do it all. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and say, you know, we've been working to replace some software and get more things online, and we have. And it was kind of unfortunate it happened during this quarantine or this separation. Probably had very few people here in the office, but worked through it. We had a software contract that was running out, and they wouldn't extend for anything other than but for a full other year, and that just didn't make sense to us to do that. But right now, if you know you want to do permitting, you can do it online, or the best way to do it online is go to Chattanooga 10.viewpointcloud.com, and we'll pull right up, and there's a way for you to register as a contractor. Very simple. 3 or 4 questions, set up your own PIN number, and you can start applying for permits right away. And we've been running, we've run some licensing out there. You have local license you need to get. We're working that right now. We've, Tony can attest, we've even had a surveyor submit a subdivision plat and paid for it online. There is payment available online as well. We're working out some more changes for that, some more alternatives to just the credit card payment online. But the one hiccup we found is some of the transferring of old data from our old system into the new system. There's some things we have to go in there and activate manually and transfer some data. But, you know, going through this 12 years ago with another software, this has been much more seamless. I know to those that haven't tried to use it, but to attest to some of that, we've got a few numbers out since we activated this thing May the 11th. And Charlie, you want to talk about some numbers with us?
If I can, I'll add in a total group of numbers just to give you an overview of what, beginning on March the 16th, when we started working remotely during the COVID-19 pandemic. Since March 16th till this morning at 8 a.m., the Land Development Office has performed 7,574 inspections. We've issued 2,294 permits. Now, I'm going to break down those numbers a little bit. Since May the 11th, when we started our new software, we have created 930 total records in it. 444 of those records are actual permits that were issued, and we have logged in 1,438 inspections. Out of those 444 permits issued, the largest majority of those have been applied for online. The online application has been very successful. For the most part, most of our hiccups have been internal hiccups or through our inspection process. The online portal is working really well. Now, any problems that you may encounter or any of your staff would encounter, if you would make us aware of them, we will address them within 1 to 2 business days, have them corrected. I'd like to also add that there is a shortcut link. If you go to chattanooga.gov on the homepage, at the bottom it says online services. There is a link that says online permitting that will take you straight to the homepage for our new software, which is called Viewpoint Cloud, and you can begin to create your account there.
We have found that there is a lot of automation in this system. We've had people that said they couldn't get to the end of their permit, and it's tied to, this system's tied to mapping, but then they found out they were actually in the county, and it wouldn't let them go any further because it wasn't recognizing it within our jurisdiction. Just keep working with it. Like I said, let us know, but establish your account. You can schedule, you'll see 3 headings when you get there: permitting, inspection, and licensing. You can choose one of those and get in and answer some questions and submit your permit, and we will approve it and send it back, and you can pay for it and be on your way. We'll still take checks, but like I said, we're still working out some stuff. We had some dog and pony shows planned to roll this out, but without groups being able to meet, it didn't work out real well. And the software people still owe us a week on site with one of their software engineers. So, to really, really work this. Remember though, for the contracting community, all our guys, field inspectors' numbers are still published. If you have trouble, you can contact your actual, if you know your inspector in your area. All those numbers are published. They will come to their voicemail here, because I think everybody will attest it's not the best thing for inspectors to be driving or walking construction sites trying to answer questions about codes or what some of the policies are. So, but they check their email or voicemail about every hour and return calls. So understand that's still available. But also, once you log in and you start getting permits this way, whenever you log back in, all of your permits, all of your projects are going to be there. Some of the old ways to schedule inspections, you had to have a tracking number or the permit number. If you just get back to your main site, when you log in, you go, yeah, it's the Broad Street project. You can just go down there and click on it, or and you'll have all your information of all your permits that you have ongoing. And we also, when we'll do an inspection, it will reply to you as well. That's one of the things. There's so much automation that every time we move it around here in the office, it's been sending emails out. And some people have got 30 emails in 20 minutes. So, we're learning all of its capabilities as well as we move forward. And there are ways to turn those notifications off, and we're working on reducing some of those too. So, a lot of people, we've got a lot of positives, and then we've got some negatives. There's a learning curve for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, Dallas. Thank you, Charlie. We really appreciate that. Lots of inspections being done, lots of permits being processed. So the Land Development Office is open for business. That's good. That's good. You guys are getting a lot of stuff done. So thank you for that.
And the tornado on top of everything. It's been like the perfect storm around here. So
yeah. You guys have been able to.
And I appreciate the contracting community bearing with us, and let us know. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dallas. Thank you, Charlie. Thank you, Tony, if you're still back there. So we've got some questions from our participants in the Q&A. So Brooke, do you want to go through our participant questions?
Yeah, sure. We haven't had too many questions, and you guys have actually done a really good job answering them already. But one question goes back to when we were talking about checking temperatures. How do you recommend, or how are you guys having people actually, record them? What are you requiring? And how are you how are you keeping track of that?
I'll take a quick stab at this first. And I was not part of the webinar where this was discussed, but there was a webinar a few weeks back, and there was an OSHA official on the webinar who kind of indicated that, if you are recording these temperatures, then they do fall into the medical records category, which means retention for the duration of employment plus 30 years. However, he said if you want to do an informal, logging where you're, not tracking these, then you would not fall under that requirement. We've sent a letter over to OSHA seeking clarification on that, but that was information that was provided during this particular webinar, that it would constitute a medical record, thus falling within the retention requirements under their standard or regulation.
That's a great flag. Does anyone else want to add anything there? Russ, I think you're muted.
Sorry about that. I agree with Kevin. We are actually not recording temperatures. We're only recording the temperature if the employee tests, positive above 100.4. Obviously, we're doing that confidentially to protect the employee's rights with ADA, and then sending them off, to seek a physician. But we're not recording every employee's temperatures.
Great. So this question may be for Dallas, and I think probably the rest of you can speak to it as well. In terms of suspending the project if the guidelines are not being followed, is that completely on the contractor to ensure adherence to these guidelines? Can the city legally shut down a project? What does that look like?
Brooke, can I jump in and respond to that one?
Sure.
And so I think, and then Dallas, if you have anything that you want to add, based on our interpretation of the Tennessee Pledge guidelines, the Tennessee Pledge guidelines are recommendations for businesses. They are not mandates. And so given that they are not mandates, we, the city, do not have the authority to shut down construction sites where there may be people who are not necessarily implementing all of the recommendations called for in the Tennessee Pledge. The only authority that has at this point the ability or the authority to potentially do some sort of shutdown would potentially either be OSHA or the Hamilton County Health Department. But the city of Chattanooga doesn't have the ability to do that. With regards to, I think the follow-up question that came, what if someone is working on a new contract? That is something that we'll have to do a little bit more investigating on in terms of reaching out to our city attorney for clarification on that. But again, the recommendations that are put forth in the Tennessee Pledge are not mandates, and they do not allow local cities they are not enforceable by local cities. But the health departments do have the ability to come in and to sort of say or declare that something is unsafe and therefore needs to be suspended. Dallas, did you have anything to add, or Kevin?
Well, yeah, maybe just one thing. That's correct. We would not have the power to shut the job down. I have instructed our inspectors, though, if they do not feel that it's safe and the job's too crowded, to let the superintendent know that we'll come back on a day that it's not crowded, and kind of educate them to say, hey, the best reason for you practicing social distancing may be so that your job will get completed quicker, that you don't have an outbreak here, and have another organization get involved, like say maybe the health department that could shut it down. So
yeah, keep in mind, OSHA can do an inspection based on a complaint from an employee who might not feel like practices or recommendations are being followed and guidelines, and OSHA would potentially issue a violation under the general duty clause for protection of employees for anything that could be immediately dangerous to life and health.
Right. And, to Russ's point, they just recently, I think last week or maybe the week before, they issued their updated interim enforcement response plan as to how they're going to start. At first, OSHA was not solely focusing, but a lot of their focus was on the healthcare industry as far as enforcing COVID-19 complaints. But they announced last week that they will start responding, to more of these types of complaints outside of healthcare. But for construction, I would say most likely you'll get, one of the phone fax complaint forms where they'll say, "Hey, this was brought to our attention. Is it true? And if so, what are you doing about it?" So to Russ's point, be on the lookout that OSHA is starting to respond to these complaints. Now, as far as shutting the job site down, to your point, Jermaine, I think it would be most likely the health department versus OSHA that would shut down the project.
Thank you for that clarification, Kevin. Brooke?
So we're about to run out of time, and we've covered, I think, most of the questions from the participants. But I do just want to remind everyone that the recording for this webinar will be on the our website, and all of you will get a follow-up email probably tomorrow notifying you that it's all on the website. We'll also link to the permitting links that Dallas was talking about, and so we will have all of that available, plus the Tennessee Pledge guidelines on our website tomorrow. And before Jermaine wraps up, I just want to say thank you to all of our participants for being here today, and all of our panelists. You guys have provided so much information that I'm sure has been helpful to a lot of people. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here. And Jermaine, if you will finish us out.
Yeah, I just want to say, again, thank you to Leslie for helping us to make this happen. Thank you to Kevin and Russ and Brian. And I'm sure I thank Dallas and Charlie enough. So for all the work that they do on the LDO to support us. They are always helping us out with one thing or another. But thank you to all of our panel. You guys did a great job, and we appreciate you taking time out of your day to help make this information available to the public. Thank you to those of you who are viewing for taking time out of your day to tune into the webinar. Hopefully it was helpful for you. We've got an additional webinar coming up this Friday that is going to be focused on lodging and accommodations. So it's specifically going to be talking to some industry professionals in the hotel industry, as well as the short-term vacation rental, which is Airbnb. So we're going to be having that webinar and exploring that one on Friday. And again, if you have questions about specific job sites or specific companies, then the best person locally to contact is going to be Bonnie Deacons, who is over environmental health for the Hamilton County Health Department. Her number is up here on the screen. Also, please check the Tennessee Pledge guidelines that Russ was so gracious enough to provide us an overview during the beginning of this webinar. So you can find the Tennessee Pledge guidelines at tnpledge.com, and that will take you to the Tennessee Pledge website that was established, and it will really show you a breakdown of the guidelines by different industries. So that should be super helpful for you. And then if you have general questions for me and Brooke, or just ways that you think we can improve the webinars, just let us know. Please feel free to email us to the email addresses on the screen. And then again, if you operate in the construction industry, and we realize that a lot of our construction industry folks have been sort of working this entire time through the pandemic, we just ask that you please try to implement the safety measures that are being called for in the Tennessee Pledge guidelines, so that we can keep our employees and keep our city safe from COVID-19. Again, The research seems to show that people typically get infected from other people in clusters, usually in a cluster from their household or a cluster from their workplace. So please, let's make sure that we all do our parts to keep our workplaces safe. And if you can't keep your workplace safe, then you should really be thinking very deliberately about whether or not you should be in operation. And so with that, I think that's it. So thank you all again for your time today. Again, thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Brian. And thank you, Dallas and Charlie and Tony. And as always, thank you, Brooke, for producing the webinar. Y'all have a good day.
Thank you, Jermaine. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for letting us be a part. Nice to meet all you guys.
Nice meeting you.
Bye-bye.
Seeing you.